Welcome back to a Book a Day podcast. In the previous podcast, I was discussing this book called Status Anxiety, written by Alain de Botton. And the book is essentially about the kind of anxiety we feel because of our status in the society. When we feel that we are not good enough, our standing when it comes to the standards of the society according to which individuals or groups are measured, that standing is not good enough. And we fear that. We fear that we might be judged or even worse, ridiculed, mocked. And because of that, we end up doing a lot of things. We end up pursuing different careers or working harder than we should be. We compromise on our health, all because we are feeling anxious because of our status. And then we discussed the causes of it. Now, in the second part of this discussion on the book, I'm going to be talking about the solutions, which is the second half of this book. It talks about solutions, what we can do. So let's talk about that. The first solution that the author talks about is philosophy. What we mean by philosophy in this case is kind of having philosophical inquiry, kind of having rational thought in our heads, and having a conversation with ourselves in order to overcome this anxiety. And one of the simplest and probably the most important step to work on this is how do we process other people's view of us and how that affects our self-image. We need to work on that. For example, if somebody criticizes the amount of money that you're making, and based on that, if your self-image is that you are a loser, you are dishonorable, you're not worthy of respect, that's a problem, right? You are making yourself vulnerable to the judgments of others. So, what do we need to do? Author suggests that we need to include one step in between. That is, when you hear somebody else's view and how you relate it with your self-image, in between you need to add a layer of reason. That is, for example, in this case, if somebody criticizes or makes an opinion that you're not making enough money and that's really a bad thing, you need to bring in the reason. That is it really a bad thing if I'm not making a lot of money? Is it? You calmly explore this question. And then if the answer is yes, if I'm not making good enough money that it's going to affect my life, then you work on it. But if you think through reason that this kind of opinion is not really valuable, does not really carry a lot of weight, then you can ignore that opinion. And you do that with every opinion that you find in society. You subject it to reason rather than just going along with it just because a lot of people believe in it. You subject every point of view, every opinion to reason, especially if you're going to let it affect you. So, just one thing, that you subject all these views to reason. And de Botton talks about this interesting term called intelligent misanthropy. That is, you sometimes can dislike people or their opinions if you are being intelligent enough, if you are being smart enough to understand that not always people think through their opinions, not always their opinions carry a lot of weight. You can ignore them, especially when you subject those opinions to reason, you think it through, and you'll feel much better about it. So that's one solution. The second solution that de Botton talks about is art. How does art work in this case? For that, we have to understand what art really does. Whether it's a painting, it's a movie, it's a novel, what essentially art does is it makes you see certain things and it overlooks certain things, makes you focus on certain aspects of the world. And when we observe art, when we participate in it, we see the complexities, we see the beauty of life, of people, of places, and it kind of reshapes our views of the world. It reshapes how we view other people's judgments or opinions. So he talks about Jane Austen's novel Mansfield Park, which is essentially the story of a shy, modest girl who comes from a humble background, but then she has to move to her relatives' place who are very rich, and those people are judging her based on her background, based on the fact that she is not one of them. And Jane Austen makes us see her life, she makes us see their lives, and then we understand that it's not always about money. We can find so much beauty and depth and character in our lives if we could see it through fresh eyes. It's not always about these shallow parameters such as money or societal status. No. Arts help us and explore the complexities of our lives and engage with them. It makes us see the beauty of our ordinary life that we otherwise might think that we live in, let's say, a simple house. We only have a very simple job. There is nothing glamorous, nothing romantic about it. And we might assume that somebody who's living in a big palace, big mansion, their lives must be fantastic. But through art, we see that that's not necessarily the case. It's in our eyes. Can we find beauty in our own house, in our simple jobs? Can we romanticize them? And when we can do that, it makes life so much easier. Then we don't worry so much about achieving grand things, because then we can see the beauty right next to us in our lives. And then he talks about different kinds of art and even the role of tragic art, for example, or humor to turn our worries, our tragedies, our hardships into some kind of positive and therapeutic experience. Art allows us to do that. And it's really beautiful. So that's how art can help you in overcoming this anxiety because of status. The other solution is politics. What do we mean by that? That we understand the socio-political dynamics of the world that we live in. The thing to understand here is that the status is that we are called to different professions, different kinds of people or groups. They are very much dependent on the times we live in, and they vary from society to society, time to time, and we should not be too serious about those standards. And the author gives a number of examples. For example, in Sparta, in Greece, somewhere around 400 BC, the idea of the most honored members of society was men who were really aggressive, who had large muscles, and they had very little interest in family life, and they were just enthusiastic for killing. and they got a lot of respect in the society. Whereas you compare pretty much the same society in the Western Europe in in the second half of the first millennium, that is about from 5th century to 10th century, after the fall of the Roman Empire, there was Christianity that was growing, and the Christian values were gaining prominence. So, in that society, people who were humble, who were kind, who were practicing religion, they got a lot of respect. So, compare that with the Sparta of, let's say, 400, 500 BC, and compare those guys to Western Europe of uh, the first millennium after the arrival of Christianity. Such a huge contrast in terms of how people got their respect. And you compare that with today, where people get respect based on the kind of jobs they do, the kind of money they make. That's again very different. So these standards, they keep changing, they keep varying, and we should not worry too much about that. We must also remember that ours is a very materialistic society. And generally, we get the impression through media, through different opinions, that more things we acquire, more wealth we make, it's going to make us happier and happier. It's going to just get better. But the reality is not quite that. It's not the same when we acquire something, let's say material wealth, and then we are constantly going to be happy. No. Normally, what happens is, in that moment when we acquire new wealth, we get happy, and soon, very soon in fact, the happiness levels once again came down to the normal levels. Once again, we are same, just like we were before we acquired material wealth. So we have to be very, very careful about what we are chasing and where our priorities are. If we just listen to the noise around, what the media is saying, what the businesses are trying to tell us, that may not necessarily be true. Once again, we need to subject all these views to reason, and then we'll be able to see through it. And then he talks about one of the solutions is Christianity. And I think you can replace it with any other spiritual or religious idea. And the idea is that we are inevitably going to die. What's going to happen then? Does it really matter that we acquired a lot of things and we constantly worried about what other people thought of us and we lived our life in that fear? Does it really matter? More importantly, we have this innate spiritual appetite about what we are doing in this world. And when we pursue that path of spirituality or religion, it naturally makes us feel grounded. Once we have that kind of support with us, we feel grounded. And when we are grounded, it's very easy to not get affected by other people's judgments, their opinions, because then we have faith somewhere else, maybe in God, maybe in scriptures or some other spiritual ideas. We are grounded there. We are not going to get hurt or anxious by the societal judgments. It's not going to affect us. So if we pursue that path of religion, path of spirituality, that is also going to help us. So that's another one of the solutions. And the final solution, although I should use that term carefully, in this case is the chapter called Bohemia. And the chapter essentially talks about how at the start of 19th century, these new group of people, they started emerging, these hippies and more artistic, unconventional people, and they formed their groups. And their attitudes fundamentally were quite opposed to the conventional standards and beliefs of the society. They understood that most of these standards were set by the society and there was not a lot of thought behind it. They were arbitrary. And all these standards and conventions were somehow holding them back, not allowing them to express themselves. So they chose this less conventional path and became free spirits. And there is an interesting insight of this bohemian lifestyle. It's that if we surround ourselves with a bunch of people and these people are living their life at odds with the mainstream idea of culture and society, then we don't feel that fear or anxiety of meeting the social standards, because most of our focus is usually on our immediate environment. If we choose the people around us very carefully, those who share our values, who have similar ideas and beliefs about how to live a life, then it becomes much easier to overcome this phenomena of social anxiety or status anxiety. Generally, we don't care that much about people or their opinions who are living far away from us, who are not close to us in terms of friendship, in terms of relationships. Then we don't care that much. We don't care about people who are living in another country and if they are earning a lot of money. We don't care that much. We care about people who are around us, who are close to us emotionally. And that's where our focus should be on. Who do we surround ourselves with? So these were the solutions that he talks about in the second half of the book called Status Anxiety. And I hope you got to learn something valuable here. We all feel this status anxiety and we all can work on it. And it begins just by the recognition that status can be very arbitrary. It can vary from society to society. We don't have to take it very seriously. And also we can choose our audience, we can choose people around us to ensure that we don't feel humiliated, we don't feel terrified because of our social standings. It's also important to recognize that even though these anxieties can be unpleasant and they might affect us in this point of time, but it's very difficult to imagine any kind of life where you'll be entirely free of them. They'll always follow you, to some extent at least. No matter how much equality we achieve in our societies, how much money we make, essentially every society is unequal in some ways. Some people will have higher standings, some people will have lower standings. That's how people judge, that's how people view others. And the more equal societies become, the more money people start making, the more differences we start noticing along other lines, not just material, but other lines such as respect, such as the value that we are providing to the society, or how many things we are hoarding. It just keeps coming in different ways. And what we are trying to do through solutions is not that we are trying to get rid of all these hierarchies. No, we're trying to figure out which hierarchies work better for us, where we can climb, we can improve ourselves and have a greater sense of self-worth. That's what we are trying to do here. But at the same time, we're trying to constantly work on ourselves so that we don't get affected, at least to a large degree, by other people's opinions. So that was the book, and I hope you really enjoyed listening to all these lessons. I hope it will help you dealing with any kind of status anxiety that you are experiencing. Thank you very much for listening. I will come back to you in the next episode with another new book. Thank you.